Hi, everybody. So I've decided to just record this quick introduction and an additional closing piece to add on to this recording. The conversation that we had recently between myself and Mayer Hillman and Bex and La and Jill was very difficult. And I wanted to acknowledge that and let viewers know that it's hard conversation. I also wanted to acknowledge that we're having a discussion about the worst possible assessment of the situation, and that within this dialogue, we explore things around Mayer's perspective. I don't bring myself forward as a presenter to question his views, rather to engage with them. That said, there is no guaranteed diagnosis about what is going to happen. There are routes that you can find through Extinction Rebellion to find support and emotional support and psychological support, and I recommend that you engage with the things that are available, including the Trained Emotional Support Network, which I think you can get to via the Regenerative Cultures team. And also I know that we can call on the Climate Psychology Alliance for support as climate activists. So I hope you enjoy listening to the conversation and exploring these things. And I'll record a little message to close as well. Okay, hello, welcome everybody. This afternoon, I'm very lucky to be joined by a very famous scientist, Mayer Hillman, and also three outstanding rebels, Ursula, Jill and Bex. And we're going to have a conversation about the current predicament that we find ourselves in. My name's Clare. Farrell. I'm one of the co-founders of Extinction Rebellion, and I work with the media team here in the UK. And I'm just going to open straight away and invite everybody to introduce themselves. So shall I come to you first, Bex?
Hi, everybody. Bex. I'm 50. I've got 3 children. I work for Extinction Rebellion full-time. I work in local group support and development. So I sit in the community circle, and I joined Extinction Rebellion in April with no background in activism or being green. Shame on me. And I'm here for children, not just my children, everybody's children. I can't wait to have a chat with you all. Is that enough info?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Bex. Let's go to Jill.
Right. Hello, I'm Jill. I'm in my early 70s. I live in Totnes, and I've been involved for the last couple of years with Extinction Rebellion here, in particularly with an absolutely extraordinary affinity group called the Ground Elders, named after that plant, where there are between 14 and 18 of us between mid-60s and early 80s who've been very active. I used to teach at undergraduate level around cultural studies and various political issues. And I worked combined with that for many years on HIV awareness and prevention, which I did in very many different cultures and contexts. And I'm really glad to be with you all.
Thanks, love. La, do you want to go?
Okay. I'm La. I'm with the Grandparents and Elders, which are a fantastic group. I'm also with the Justice Steering Group, my local affinity group, which are marvellous. And last but not least, I'm part of the hunger striking team, currently known as Earth Fast, because we think it sounds better to the public. I joined Extinction Rebellion in July 2019. Obviously, I was somewhat concerned, and it has absolutely transformed my life. And thank you very much for asking me here. Right, that's me.
Thank you, La. And last but not least, do you want to introduce yourself, Mayer?
Yes, well, very briefly, I'm much older than all of you. I started out my adult life as an architect and planner, and that was starting up 67 years ago. So I gave that up after 13 years because I recognised the damage that the car was doing to our society, and I wrote my doctoral thesis showing how one should be designing new towns for people, for everybody, rather than just for adults who have cars. And that was the predominant means of travel. It was assumed everybody would soon have, if they didn't already have it, as if we're all old enough to drive on our own, and as if we all have the skills to drive. And I thought that could only apply to nearly everybody about getting around on foot or bicycle. And it seemed to me that is the form that it should take. So I wrote my doctoral thesis and cut that. And then I joined the Policy Studies Institute in 1970. And I was with them, with the Institute, until it collapsed, because being an educational charity, it didn't attract the funds to keep it going. But I've been working for the last 30 years on climate change, writing about it and researching into it and looking at the ways and means of meeting the challenge. 20 years ago, 20 years ago, yes, nearly 20 years ago, I wrote a penguin book in which I imagined that I was breaking the ground by suggesting that the way to solve this problem of climate change was to have a worldwide system of carbon rationing. And it was very well reviewed in the papers. But then a few years ago, I criticised myself, particularly the way I had written it in the Penguin book, because it seemed to me you can't ration something that is already in negative availability. In other words, sharing out, which is the system of rationing, would allow one to say, well, you can all have, albeit a small amount, and that has got to be the same all around the world on an equal per capita basis. But if there's nothing left, which there isn't, then how can you share it out? Sharing out a negative amount is not possible. So I have been writing ever since, particularly pointing out the fact that we have already, it's far too late already, and we should stop saying you can't put forward a suggestion that has not got hope or optimism in it. You can't talk about the future as if we all have we can all look forward to a better situation for ourselves, if not for our children and our grandchildren. The reality is, well, perhaps I could quote you an exchange I had with, you'll remember him, he's still alive, he's still chairman of the Climate Change Committee, John Gunner, and I had a conversation with him in the House of Commons a few years ago, and he said to me, the trouble with you is you don't face reality. He said, do you really think I can say to my constituents in Suffolk, vote for me, but I'm afraid the future is in a parlous state. We can't look forward to the future. He said, I've got to be optimistic about the future. And I said, that's ridiculous. I said, are you saying you will only be elected if you deceive your electorate by saying there's hope for the future? He was livid at that exchange I had with him, and the conversation terminated right away. But I do believe this. I've written a great deal about it in various places, including The Guardian, pointing out that we've got to face the reality that we're far too late and we should stop kidding ourselves that you can't propose a future in which there is no hope. But the way I now have framed it is, I think, the right way, which is to say that we should stop deceiving ourselves that there is light at the end of the tunnel, but what we can do as the alternative is to say, let's extend the tunnel, even although we have to admit that there's no light at the end of it. In other words, we're far too late to save the future.
Thank you, Mayer. I wanted to ask you, actually, I guess today is the day that we're recording this. There's been a new release from the UN on the NDCs that have been submitted to the UK ahead of COP, and it shows a very vast gap between what is required of nations to submit in terms of their what they call ambition. I hate that word. Their ambition for cutting carbon and what they should be delivering, and what actually has come through now that they've examined those NDCs. It is woefully short of what's been asked of nations. And some people have called me today to say, you know, it's would give a total reduction of something like 1% of carbon emissions compared to 2010 levels. So this is what's happening in political landscape and in our international negotiations. So really, it seems to me that we have to take matters into our hands as citizens and say that this is not, and the people who are leading are not fit to be leading. So in terms of thinking about your recent statement in this essay I read that you sent to me, the planet's limits have been so far exceeded that we can no longer be optimistic about the future. Can you just say something about what we're doing in Extinction Rebellion? Because I think often we're termed as people who are, you know, very doomful about the future. Do you want to make a comment on that? And then I'm going to ask the ladies to talk about what they've been doing as well.
Well, I think at the heart of the matter is the fact, and the government keeps on coming up with statements about how much effort is being put into reducing the emissions that the country produces. Where it is wrong is in two respects. Number one, it doesn't really matter what the UK does because we are only 1 or 2% of the world's population, and this, as we all know, is a global problem. But on top of that is the fact that when the UK talks about reducing emissions, it is a lie, a complete lie. And everybody, almost, I'm sure the people joining this debate are not liars, but the government certainly is. So is the opposition. So is everybody who doesn't recognise that when you talk about reducing emissions, you're not talking about it at the global level. You're talking about reducing the rate of increase in emissions, because at the global level, any burning of fossil fuels is adding to the problem. We've got to stop burning fossil fuels. And why I am so pessimistic, well, it's not good enough to say so. I'm totally pessimistic about the future, because the only way that this can be done is by stopping using fossil fuels, because any use of them is still adding to the global content or the accumulation of emissions, because they remain in the atmosphere for well over 100 years. So it's ridiculous to talk about, and this is something that really gets up my back, because I'm quite sharp on these matters. When we talk about, oh yes, we're going to have, most cars are going to be electric, as if somehow or other the manufacture and the use of the cars, it doesn't entail any use of fossil fuels. Of course it does. We've got to stop using cars. We've got to stop flying, which means not just we've got to prevent the increase in the number of airports or the size of airports, because any flying is just adding to the problem. Meanwhile, we're battling this being like being on an escalator, going uphill, but the escalators taking us downhill at too fast a rate. We are attempting to do the impossible, and we ought to, at the least, face up to the reality that that is what we're doing. The problem lies at the heart, at the heart of the matter in three respects. Number one, the public don't want to hear the fact that there's no future. Number two, politicians don't want to say that we've got no future. Otherwise, people will say, "Well, why don't we? If we don't admit that there's no future, politicians have got no future because nobody will elect them." And number three is the business community, which isn't going to say there's no future because they depend on a future. If they depend on demand being met. So perhaps that's sufficient.
Thank you, Mayer. And that just reminds me of the conversation we had the other day when we were planning to get on this call about what does it mean when people sort of have a terminal diagnosis. It doesn't mean that people give up, right? It means that people cherish what's in front of them. It means that people, appreciate life and try to tend to it and try to care for it the most that they possibly can. So I'm going to bring you in, La, because you gave a really interesting interview about your being arrested previously as part of some of XR's actions. And the message was about referencing the war era. And I wondered if I could just ask you to speak about that as an elder in our movement.
I certainly can. First of all, I have to say that that was quite a blitzkrieg, Mayer, and we needed to hear it, and it's really difficult hearing it. So, because I grew up in the Second World War, and one of the actions I did led me to interview the Green Party on their policy for climate change and what they proposed to do about it. And there was a lot of greenwashing, I have to say. And my role was to tell them what it was like in the Second World War when we had no television, we had no aeroplanes, we had no cars. We had an amazing community spirit, and the will of the people in Parliament came together. We were cooperative. We made our own fun as children. We led a very simple lifestyle, and the whole of that economy was turned around within 3 years. So that was what I wanted to say about when faced with catastrophe. That was what happens when people in Parliament come together. And my issue as I listen to Mayer is that we ask the government to tell the truth, and we can't, paradoxically, tell the truth to the people who we want to join us, because I'm told it puts them off. So you have to give some kind of, information followed by something upbeat. And I don't know if anybody would like to address that. Thanks, Claire.
Thank you, La. I mean, I think something that I've hung on to anyway since the beginning of setting it out with Extinction Rebellion was this phrase that we used about hope dies, action begins. And I don't feel that I need a sort of conventional concept of hope in order to help me to act. In fact, I think that the word hope is very sort of attached in many ways culturally to lots of ideas about kind of modernist progress, economic growth, ever increasing sort of material gain and wealth, and possibly the idea that things stay the same. I hope things don't change. I hope we can just carry on as we are. And so that's why I've always been very sort of anti the term hope. It's not because I don't want us to strive to have, you know, a positive impact or to have the best lives that we can have, but I'm sort of personally not really into the word hope. But let's bring Bex in, because I mentioned this to her the other day. We were talking about that word and we've just been working together and getting to know each other. So do you want to come in on that, Bex?
Yeah, and I really appreciate Mayer giving us the blunt truth again, because I tend to steer away from it now, because I didn't have any climate history behind me before Extinction Rebellion. I've got 3 kids, and by the way, I'm a crier, so I won't get through this without crying. And they always talk about what they want in their future and what they want to be, and it's agony not spoiling it for them, because I think some of the things they're saying they want to be won't be possible. One of them wants to work in the oceans. It won't be possible. She might be able to work in, I don't know. And then the other child wants to do something that's fairly frivolous, and thinking you probably won't have the option of doing this because those frivolous industries won't exist. And I don't live with hope. So here we are talking about the future that probably won't exist. And it being too difficult for my mum friends is too difficult for me. But the thing that came into my heart when I always think about this is the guy that talked about what would you do to protect your children in a video that was made. What would people do to try and protect their children? They don't need to know the worst. I'm not going to tell all my friends the worst case scenarios, but I know I can tell them enough to make them do something. Because if we go down, we at least go down fighting this government that is killing and will kill children, and all the governments that will kill children and are killing children.
Yeah. Thanks, Bex. It's really difficult conversations, aren't they, to have? And well, I hope that this work that we do is the thing that helps our well-being, because for me anyway, the catharsis of taking some kind of meaningful action is really what helps me to stay well, actually, I think. Jill, shall we come to you and see what you want to add in? I'm sure you've got something to say about this.
I just want to start referring back again, Mayer, to what you said, and hearing that. I'm in the talks group here, so every 2 weeks we've been giving the XR talk, and each time we go through the little tip of all of those things that are devastating, that knowledge. We include in it a quote from James Baldwin, where he says, "Not everything can be changed, but nothing can be changed until you face the reality of the way they are." So we sort of frame the bad news, the sort of there with that before going on. But just hearing you speak so vividly to it, you know, the powerful, endless undercurrents of kind of grief and desperation and horror that in fact, you know, bubbles within our taking on this issue, trying to confront them, and a sense of impossibility. But the thing is that Extinction Rebellion, it's not only made up of turning to face it, but that signature, love and rage, that is used within the movement, that in the face of it, right, there is a kind of sense that we will name it, we will confront, we will disrupt, we will, through small, rippling, endless actions and the mounting of the big actions in numbers, something will be moved. It may not solve it, and it may not solve the tunnel, but there is, I feel, an energy with that. And in that, I also, I always want to invoke the regenerative culture dimension of Extinction Rebellion, because there's a terrain in which there are all these, you know, desperate, facing reality sides of it. Then there is the targeting and the naming, the leadership, the government, the finance sectors, the fossil fuel industries, the 100 companies, all of that. There's the targeting of it. And then within it and among us and in the energy that feeds us, there is a sense that we're also doing this out of kind of love. And it's a love for life, and it's a love for plants, and it's a love, Bex, what you're saying. I've got 3 little grandchildren, and I'm encouraging them to think about nature. They're little under 6 and whatever, and their parents are very aware, but I don't want to talk to even their parents too much about the stuff that's immersed in the movement, because they've got so much on their plate. They've got the jobs, the childcare, all the worries, that they're with the virus, and everything. But I just want to sort of, maybe just end that little bit with talking about there's something about the regenerative culture that if we help be building as we go into whatever action, as we do whatever call out, or as we are one in that crowd of, 700 that are there on that bridge or whatever it is, if we're also, which Extinction Rebellion fosters in us, we are trying to live something that is about caring and loving. And it's not that I have hope, but something in my heart believes that some way, some of that will prevail. And I'm grateful to Extinction Rebellion for putting all those things together.
Thanks, Jill. I can see La wants to come back in.
Yes, thanks, Claire. I wanted to add about the Second World War, because clearly there were disasters and horrors going on, and those have to be acknowledged. But if you could take them out of the equation, the point I wanted to make is the very simple lifestyle was amazingly good. That's a message that I don't think we can speak strongly enough about. It isn't going without and suffering. It's about having a really great lifestyle. Sorry.
Thanks, La. Well, that's interesting because that goes to consumption, doesn't it? And we were talking the other day, Mayer, about the contract and converge view of consumption. And obviously what you've just said earlier is all about the fact that we've already breached the limits. We've not got carbon budget. We need to stop consumption. So do you want to maybe mention something about that for us?
Yes, I would like to come in here just to comment on what has been said, because it seems to me that, for instance, when I finished writing the Penguin book, and it is in the Penguin book because I had a collaborator on the writing of the report, and she was very insistent that the end of the book should have within it what we can do as individuals. And my view was that this is ridiculous to talk about it, because it seems to me that this overlooks the most the overriding issue, which is that it doesn't matter what we do as individuals. It really doesn't. We go on deceiving ourselves. Oh, we can do something, we can act, we can do this. And even if you see, as you do very occasionally, some progress being made by what we as individuals do, the we has now got to be seen in a global context. It's ridiculous to talk about what we can do if the we doesn't apply to the whole world. It's all very well if we sort of stop burning coal or oil or whatever to generate electricity. It's ridiculous to imply thereby, by keeping quiet, having made that statement, well, of course, if we do it, China will do it, America will do it, South America will do it, Africa will do it. Of course they won't. Some of them will, and some of them will do as little as possible. The implication of what we're doing is that if the UK commits its share, and that's what is so much at the heart of what is going to happen in Glasgow. I can tell you what the end of the Glasgow COP meeting is going to be, they're all going to wrap their hands around each other, hug each other and say, oh, we've done it at last, at last. It's absolute nonsense unless everybody agrees to stop burning fossil fuels. Now, we know that that is unreal to look forward to that happening. For instance, the great British public is looking forward to everybody having been vaccinated, so nearly everybody, so that we can then revert back to the way of life that we were leading before the pandemic. And of course, what was happening in that way of life, we were all running around in cars and flying for holidays or to second homes or for business purposes. But any flying is just not possible in a world which is aiming to achieve zero emissions. Zero emissions being, you notice that the government uses the word net zero because this is no doubt the influence of the aviation industry, where the aviation industry has conned. Oh dear.
Oh.
Just 1 second. I'll call you back. What was I saying? Well, let me get on to the focus of our discussion here now is about children. Just think to me, in fact, I'd like to hear the views of some of you to the proposition, what does the Children's Society have to say? The Children's Society was set up in order to reduce the stress among children and to promote their well-being. So all its efforts are in that regard. Now, what do you do in a situation, here we are in 2021, are we supposing to devote our lives to reducing stress and promoting the well-being of children when we know that they've got to be stressed, they've got to be told, my interest is in at what age you think children can be told about the realities of the process that has been carried out in our names without our agreement. And even if it were within our agreement, most people will say, oh, well, our agreement, well, you can't treat stopping flying as part of our agreement. We still want to go on flying. And in this country, people still want to go on flying. In China, they want to, if they're not already in India, they want to go on, they want to start flying and carry on. In other words, everybody is looking forward to a future which is sufficiently understanding of the issue of climate change, that it is prepared to tolerate things that cannot be tolerated. Should not be tolerated. It doesn't mean to say, well, we ought to tolerate as much as possible. As much as possible, it just flies in the face of the common sense that we've got to stop doing these things. And my observation on viewing the world through, not through rose-coloured spectacles, but the realities of the world, which is to stop pretending to ourselves that there is a future, that there is light at the end of the tunnel, because there isn't. So at what age does one tell children? Do they have to be, well, maybe when they start to protect children, young children start talking about climate change when they're 7 or 8? That's not sensible, because that will get them depressed. If they've got mental states, they'll start, there'll be an increase in the numbers committing suicide. So at what age do we do it? At 14, 16? Do we say, oh, we've been deceiving you all along through your childhood, that the world's, you've got a lovely world to look forward to. The reality is we've got to tell them there's an awful world to look forward to. And the longer it goes on, you children are the ones who are going to carry the burden of having to cope with a world which is in decline and which is heading for extinction. Now, what do you do about that? That's why I'm so grossly pessimistic about the future. We have to stop engaging in wishful thinking.
Thanks, Mayer. I know we had a conversation the other day actually about telling the truth. And obviously we've always had this thing, tell the truth and then act as if the truth is real. And we were talking about young people, I think, Bex, you were there, and someone said, you know, I don't want to be the person that kills Santa. And that was the comparison, because it is for children. People don't know what to do they? And I think there's our friend John Fuller, who's a fantastic campaigner, and at some point, early days of XR, he'd also said that there was an age limit at which he wouldn't talk to children about climate. He went out and did a lot of work in schools, and he'd stopped talking to younger children and only speaking to older children about it, because he felt the reality was too serious now for him to teach young children. So he could only take it to people in an older age bracket. But I don't know, Bex, if you want to come in and say anything about this.
So our children are 5, just turned 12 and nearly 16. So after I read the IPCC report, we did make some immediate changes, and we explained in loose terms why we'd done it. We became vegetarian, and we reduced significantly the amount of plastic in our home, and they have less toys because of this. And when we do it, we talk about the impacts on nature and animals and species and biodiversity, and they love that, because children are compassionate and they make an instant connection. So they really accept all of that, and they accept that we didn't fly anyway, but you know, they now understand the reasons why we would never fly. And I'm really proud of how they've adapted. They didn't resist, in the same way that Lars talking about, you know, the Second World War. People adapted really quickly, like we have adapted with COVID. It doesn't mean that you're going to be unhappy. And we are just at the start of our journey. There's many, many more things that we will do with our children as they grow up to prepare themselves for what's coming at them. And that I'm really angry about the way it's treated in the school system. So my child at secondary school gets a relatively superficial, tokenistic, this is climate change, but here's the solutions, it's going to be grand. And they've done it at primary school. It's the school head could take the responsibility to make significant changes at school. They could change the diets, they could have vegan days, but you can ask for those sorts of things and you get a bristle, because, you know, they don't want to be the person responsible to the rest of the parents who are going to go, why are you doing this? But at some point, they also need to face the truth. They are responsible for educating our children. And it doesn't mean you damage them. It just means that you do it drip, 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 and toughen them up. They deserve it, because they also need to, this is it, they need to send the kids out on strike. They need to do that. And it's infuriating that the teachers' unions don't send them, say to the kids, you are not being penalised because it's your future, but they're all being cowardly about it. And it really is astonishing, because I think that most of the heads of those unions will know, but it just takes guts, and people need to get the guts like we've all chosen to do by joining Extinction.
Yeah, and I think also, you know, for me, it felt like when we launched XR, there was an awareness of this problem, and everybody had sort of in the public conversation, I felt, gone from an abject state of denial to like, oh my God, this is really fucking bad. And there was not really a transition time in between in some ways, because people weren't allowed to talk about this, because it wasn't taken seriously, because so much was suppressed and so much was done to distort that public conversation. We now have people in I think a much greater state of trauma than was really than could have been the case if people had been able to talk about this openly. You know, and that journey of children understanding diets and different aspects, things that affect their lives. I think whilst the individual choices don't change the outcome, because we need systemic changes, it possibly does help young people at least, to understand, you know, that their lives have impacts. But I can see your hand, Mayer. What did you want to say? And then I'll come back to Bex.
I'll just try to be very brief. A few years ago, I was asked to go around some London schools to tell them what life was like during the Blitz, during the Second World War, when I was their age. And I really took them aback, because they said, was it awful with the bombing and so on? And I said, well, let me surprise you. It was a wonderful time. My brothers and I used to want to follow the war and drew comfort from. We weren't frightened about bombing, because we never thought it would kill us. You know, you just don't take that into account. And it seems to me that everybody can only draw on their own experience in order to determine what needs to be done. And again, I really go back to a bit what Bex was saying with talking about we in this country. I just want to say that my instinct, of course, is to think, what can I do? And in fact, nearly all my life I've been a vegetarian. Nearly all my life I've gone around on a bicycle. Nearly all my life, for the last 25 years I haven't been in an aeroplane, even although I've had every invitation to visit, to talk at conferences in Australia, New Zealand, Vietnam, America, and so on, and I've declined them all, and these have all been requests given over the phone or by email, and what I have said in them is, of course I accept your invitation, and how kind of you, but of course you do understand I won't be coming. The people attending the conference won't see me. I'll send it to you or do it by, as we're doing now. But it doesn't matter at all. It really doesn't matter. And Bex, what you were saying, it doesn't matter what we're doing as individuals. We should stop even citing the fact what we can do as individuals, because it's just totally irrelevant. It's only what can happen, or what the world can be encouraged to do. And then to move on to the next line of reasoning, it is, of course, the whole world won't be prepared to accept restrictions on the way of life that they have assumed they will be able to carry on with or adopt, because that's the way that richer countries have been able to do it. It just won't work. There's 7.5 or more than that, 7.8 billion people living on the planet. They've all got to act, even if America or even if Russia or China or wherever were to agree to this. It wouldn't make any difference, because there's still people in the rest of the world who are still adding to the problem. So it as good as negates what they're doing.
Go ahead, Bex. I can see your hands.
Thanks. Yeah, there was a second layer. The more interesting layer was that recognising my white privilege, that I have been arrested a couple of times, and my children have understood that I don't do that lightly, and that I'm doing that because it's so serious. And actually, in reality, they're quite proud that they've got a parent prepared to stand up against a system, that they have a stronger sense of just how damaging it's going to be, because they know I wouldn't do it unless this was deadly serious. So the bigger picture is they've got a parent prepared to do that, and that has chain reactions around our whole networks. And that's what this is about, isn't it? This is about peaceful civil disobedience and whether this can be successful.
Thank you, Bex. Thanks. Do we want to hear maybe then from Jill and then Lara about taking action for XR, because obviously that we feel that we've had a decent impact in the UK, and the polling shows at the moment that we've got a very, very high support levels of support in the public in the UK for very serious action. Not to say that the government aren't completely ignoring that opportunity, but we have created, I think we've helped to create the social conditions and the political conditions where the public want to see something serious done about this. So the work that you've all done is really important. So go for it, Jill. What have you been doing with XR?
I just want to come in first just to respond a bit to Mayer, saying that, that everything has to be global. And we know that. But at another level, that can be sort of not very helpful to reiterate, because that's what people say back. Well, why should I do anything? Because they're not doing anything in China. So that knowledge is held there and becomes alive as discussions go on. And I think I'd like to pick up on what, Bex, you were just saying about, what being arrested or whatever, the discussions that go into the family. And I think that one of the things that we can all be doing in our different ways is to be injecting into the family or community histories, both the sense of the urgency of mobilization, which we do by our example, and whether that is an example of being arrested or this winter, and I know the individual thing, Mayer, I'm not saying in a way, I have gas heating. I didn't turn my heating on all winter. right? Because it's gas. And like La was saying earlier, I grew up in a house with no heating on a coastal windy path with the odd electric fire, right? Here I am, early 70s, went through the winter, layered my clothes, you know, whatever. And I'll tell the grandchildren about that, you know, so that those little gestures we do, because we've got to keep asking, how do people change? How do people come to think differently? Because we want more and more and more people, right, to be aware and to be part of that build-up. And then how do we build resilience in a community? And I think one of the things is I never grew up with any kind of critical thinking. You know, life, you went along and you went to school and you learned everything or whatever. And I think that now with the younger generation, that way of fostering them to be asking the questions and to be listening to our struggles and taking responsibility. And I actually think another aspect of Extinction Rebellion that I feel really strongly about is the concept, which I don't think has been explained and popularized enough, around the citizens' assemblies, which is that people come, and they could be my children, they could be my neighbors, could be me, are brought in and are trained to think critically, to go into dialogue with the knowledge that's there, and to then process, to take responsibility. And I think that model of one of the things that we can do, and I know against the hugeness of it, all of these things are tiny, but I think we need to find the ways to actually do all of these things and to be modeling them. And so, you know, our ground elders from Totnes were in the first group that took the south end of Waterloo Bridge in April, and all went up, and I didn't go arrestable then, but all the people, most of the people in the ground elders did. And the banners that we had done, we'd got the posters, you know, that we took with us to do with our grandchildren, to do with kind of the urgency to act now. That story goes into my family. I'm proud to be part of that group that was there and did that. I'm proud to say I didn't get arrested, but I was there with them and I leafleted on the bridge for hours or whatever. And I think we've got to also support their love of nature, their love of the beauty of things. And then that love, the insanity of the world as it comes into focus as they get a bit older, will go right into their heart and their energy to modify the end of that tunnel. And there's lots of things. I don't know whether you want to hear about more actions. I'm sure La and Bex have got things too, but I could lay out all the ripple of actions that have been undertaken just by the group of people I know here around this little town in Devon, the actions that have happened, you know, around the ocean. There have been people out stickering banks last night. There have been, you know, so many different actions that I think we all witness in our community as well. And maybe we just write a list and send them to you, Mayer, after this, so that you've got those on the map, even as you hold to the fact that that it's pretty beyond everything.
Thanks, Jill. Yeah, well, I think that's also the strongest of XR's demands, is for structural political change, which is nothing to do with carbon or science or anything. It's just about who's holding any power, who's talking about this, and who has the power to decide how we make our response, right? And that's, I agree, it's still the least understood and the most important of our facets of our demands and our work. I'll go back to you, Mayer. Go on, what did you have to add?
Well, I just wanted to say, with what Jill was referring to just now, the implication of what you were saying, Jill, is that we can in effect lead by example. When we start doing things, other people will follow us if we can show how justified we are in the actions we are taking. But that totally overlooks the fact that there is negative time in which for people to follow us. It's just, again, wishful thinking in order to retain a degree of optimism that will enable us to see the future. I'm not prepared to deceive myself that with negative time, how can you talk about the future when there is no time? It's too late, and we're not prepared to accept it. Of course, the three groups that I referred to earlier are still there. Number one is the public, who obviously don't want to accept that it's too late. They don't want to accept that they won't be able to fly on holiday. You can tell now in a rich country like this one, they can't wait till everybody's been, all the restrictions on our freedom of movement are removed so we can all fly off on holiday, as if everybody in the world can fly off on their holidays. Oh, no, we don't mean that. Oh, I see what you mean. Some people shouldn't be able to fly on a holiday. Of course, that is to a degree an example, but it's a way of seeing the future in reality rather than in theory. In theory, of course, everybody should be able to do what they want. And that, in fact, is what I want to say right at the end of this debate, but I'm quite happy to carry on with it, which is that we haven't talked about the really serious issue, which is how does democracy stand up to a situation in which what the great public want to do, which is to see things improving, which requires more energy, and yet they can't have it. In a democratic system, you have a situation in which democratic governments cannot do what the public don't vote for. How can you see the public in this country agreeing to any government? Well, even the Green Party doesn't go as I'm suggesting, which is, as I say, just one element of it, to stop using fossil fuels. It doesn't work. And now, if democracy, as I believe, has got to be challenged, what is to replace it? Is there a system of decision-making which will allow for decisions to be made which are against the public interest? Because to stop using fossil fuels is against the public interest. The public interest is to carry on improving its situation. If you can't improve it, you can still want to improve it and to pressure governments in order to enable them to do so. So if the system of government doesn't work, then you move on to morality of decision making. And from that perspective, I fear, and this is why a further degree why I'm so pessimistic, but what I do say is that I'm looking at a future without the rose-coloured spectacles, and I see that the roles that religions have, most people in the world follow some religion or another. I don't myself, I'm an atheist, but nevertheless, most people do. What happens when the situation gets harder and harder and harder? Do you think people are going to stick to moral behaviour that their religions have taught them is the only fair way to carry on? Or do we dispense with moral rules about how to behave? Because that is the destination to which we're heading, inevitably. That situation in which there isn't enough for everybody to go around. It's all very well to assume that we can work towards a situation in which everybody has got even their fair shares. If you're in a situation where you face the reality of people I mean, the evolution has taught us that competition is better than collaboration. I mean, that's what primitive man did. He was first fighting over territory and trying to get more of it. And here we are fondly imagining that we are going to dispense with that and collaborate because that is the only fair way. It would be all right if there were perhaps only one religion, although it's got to be an ecologically based religion, but it's got to be the whole world population supporting that religion and acting on that religion.
I see you, Jill. Do you want to come in?
Yes, Maya, I want to somehow take issue with what the position that you're taking, not with the content of what you're saying. And I mean, your narrative has put together really powerfully all the things that show it's too late, it's too far, it's too global, it's too lacking political systems or whatever. So I'm not talking about rose-tinted spectacles, but that in a sense, the pessimism that you put together there means what, right? It means that you do nothing, or that you sort of, you just, all we can do is fiddle and be nice to our grandchildren. I mean, I don't accept the inertia that is inevitable at the end of all that converging narrative. Not that what you're saying, I'm not saying, please, I say again that it's wrong, but I'm not prepared in the face of that to sort of feel, well, we're all doomed, we're all fucked, right? So whatever. In the face of that, something rises in me. And it is a resistance, it's a rebellion, it's love, it's caring, and it's urgency, and it's exhausting, right? But I'm not prepared to go into the pessimism goes into a sort of swamp of inertia, whereas already we're in cultures where that inertia, that indifference, that kind of is there, whatever. And my response is to want to stir up things and to say no. And there may be nothing that we can do about it. In the end, we can't solve it. But by God, we're going to go towards it with a sense of energy and activism.
Sorry, can I just briefly, because I mustn't take up too much of the time we're trying to share out between us, but just to say, you're saying exactly what I am saying, but you will agree, I hope, that the first thing to do is to recognise that we don't have light at the end of the tunnel, and then the decision, then people come to realise. I'll tell you, I make a comparison. If you allow me to take a minute or two, Claire, make a comparison between people being told by their doctor that they've got cancer and they've only got 6 months to live. The first thing they do is to get hugely depressed and think that's awful. And the second thing they do is to say, bloody hell, I'm going to make the most of it. I'm going to do everything possible to make the most of what's left to me. And I feel that is the same way that we have got to treat this situation of climate change. But right at the heart of it, to drive us along, is we've got to admit that there is no light. If we leave it until a little longer before seeing the light, that's why I was asking the question before about at what age do you tell children about the prospects from climate change. If you don't tell people sooner, the longer you leave it, the more difficult and the more shocking it is for people to come to realise that there is no light. If you go on pretending that there is light at the end of the tunnel, I think you'll do a far less than if you accept there is no light at the end of the tunnel. And there, if I may just add another comparison, it is like death. Which is, people don't like talking about it, but I fear we've got to talk about it. We all face death. I'm a bit closer to it than than you are, or but in recognizing that is a recognition of there's no light at the end of the tunnel. It's the source of that drive of saying that there is no light, there is cancer at the end of the tunnel. Let's make the most of it, which is what I was saying right at the beginning of this debate, which is extend the wall, extend the tunnel, and do as much as we can to extend it, but stop deceiving yourself that there is light at the end.
Thank you, Mayer. I can see you, La. Do you want to come in?
Thank you. Well, I'm assuming, Mayer, that the basic reason why we act the way we do is because we have a really strong survival instinct. It's Freud's survival instinct. And that what drives our horrendous economics is status. And those are the two sort of killers that we face. So I am to accept that my narrative has been not knowing, wanting to find out, learning about disagreement, and now meeting you, which is a real privilege, who says black is black. If I'm to accept that, then what? We have people like David Attenborough saying, time is running out. And many scientists who say, there's still time. I don't know. But you have some very powerful things you've said.
Can I just say a quick word? I'm glad you mentioned Attenborough, because I'm sure you all saw that television film of his, which was called something like the Climate Change, the Extinction, or something like that. I watched that program very carefully. In fact, I watched it twice because I recorded it. And sure enough, there was Attenborough, who's a sort of the person who inspires most people in this country as the most well-informed and understanding of what we need to do. And yet, at the end of the program, you will recall what he did was to show a bit of that film where about 40 years ago he was in the company of some gorillas, lying in the jungle with them and getting to know them a bit. And then he showed a film of gorillas now, and he said, and do you know what? He said, 40 years ago, the gorilla population of the world was in decline. It was falling so sharply, we thought they were going to become extinct. They weren't. There are more gorillas now than there were 40 years ago, he said, and therefore there is hope. And I thought to myself, that is a dreadful sort of thing for the viewing public to take away, that because the population of gorillas can increase, that we can somehow or other place our faith in the common sense of government that is running the show and draw comfort from it and sleep at nights. And I think that is just a further way. I'll tell you, there's another person who you may have heard of called James Hansen, who was sort of leading the fight for seeing realism. And he's got a new book coming out very soon indeed, I think in a few weeks' time. He sent me the forward to it. You wouldn't believe it. He's the most progressive person, or one of the most progressive persons in the States. Do you know something? He referred to him looking forward to the future because he said coping with climate change is going to be, and the word he used was fun, F-U-N. I thought that was dreadful, another person sort of unable to do anything that would suggest that the future is not bright.
Thanks, Mayer. Yeah, so the conversation seems to be moving around all over the place. We've got David Attenborough saying it's going to cause collapse, but sometime in the future, but maybe relatively near future, but also we don't really think Extinction Rebellion should be breaking the law. Also, have some hope because look at these gorillas. On the other hand, you've got Michael Mann saying that, you know, we're part of a soft doomism, which is going to prevent action and going to make people, you know, stop trying. And that's a problem. We've got Jem Bendel and Deep Adaptation trying to, you know, they're trying to help people to face this stuff well and accept that perhaps we face a collapse much sooner than people had originally thought. And then we have the COP process and this spectacle of the IPCC and Boris Johnson and others in the UK sort of government acting as if they're doing something when they're doing the opposite of doing something. They're actually making things constantly worse. So yeah, it's a confusing space, La, I think, in terms of understanding who should we listen to, how should we act, how urgent is it, you know, whose voice has authority here. And it strikes me that, you know, a lot of people want to hear from somebody they can trust, and they trust very much David Attenborough, and they trust very much certain well-renowned climate scientists. And whilst the conversation is so mixed, it's very, very difficult for people, I think, to anchor themselves in a place where they can feel that they've understood what's been said and they're willing to act in line with that, which is why we've invited you on as well, Mayer, I guess, because we think that this is helpful to hear these conversations out with the most, you know, the most concerned people. And recently I was looking at some notes about existential risk. And, you know, when there's an all system threat, when there's a chance of an all system damage and the outcome is potentially so severe, the fact that the risks are seen as narrow by the scientific community becomes not so relevant, because the scale of what's at stake is so big that you have to recognize that, rather than talk about, like, I think what the community has led towards, which is to say, but it's a small risk, you know, it's not a big risk, it's just possible. So I think I could see you there, Bex, wanting to chime in.
Yeah, so for me, there's two layers of misery in this: the extinction and having to face that, and then it's the bit that comes before, when people sink to the lows that we know they're capable of, and the barbarity that probably my children will be around to see. And on top of that, when they talk about that, when they have children, and I know that timescale is going to be hell on earth, and the fakery that parents have to live with. So it goes back to, how much do you tell people? How much do you ruin their lives with some knowledge? And I haven't worked it out yet. I haven't cracked it as a mum, but I think probably I'm thinking through this afternoon is that the truth is important to hear. You don't have to tell them everything. You can soft soap it a bit, because it's absolutely devastating. But I work in mobilisation for XR, and we are going to do as best as we can as a movement, mobilisation like we've never done before, because we have to prove to ourselves that we're capable of, or we're a fake movement. If we don't intend to tell the truth to every single person and then some, and find millions of inventive ways to go and use social media to tell this truth. I've got a friend who's talking about using Facebook to live stream with everybody that she's ever known, to come on that live stream at that point, for her to give a live heading for extinction her way, not the way that it's been done. These are the things that we can all do. And we've got a deadline now. We've got the end of the year with COP to work towards, as a symbolic gesture of defiance, and mobilise like this movement is never mobilised. We get out of our Britishness and stop being so, I don't want to, and just dare. I watched Holly Higgins once, and she said, dare to be great. And she asked people to stand up. And I think out of about 100 people, 3 people went, I'll stand up. And she's like, come on, British people. And that's what our nation has to get over. And then perhaps we'll show the rest of the world that we're not afraid of the government.
Thanks, Bex. I love that. I love that reference. La, did you have another thing you wanted to come in? What Bex has just mentioned about unfolding war. I know we had that very controversial action at the Centaf not that long ago, and it was termed very bad taste for us to reference war and climate change. And then just the other day, Boris Johnson said, we know that climate change is going to create increased conflict in the world. And I know that the piece that you did, the interview after your action, was talking about the war effort, and I think the frame you used was it really worth it if we then destroy everything the following century? So I wonder if you want to say anything about that, La.
Well, that was my question. And it's still the same question. Did all those people who fought in wars throughout centuries, all of it, what is the point if it's in vain and nothing has changed? I hold to that view. I wish I could talk eloquently like Jill. I can't. All I know is that facing what Mayer describes, I still can't do nothing. I must do something.
It's a great question, isn't it? When our institutions are failing us so badly, it's very, very difficult for people to anchor themselves. And I think that's why, none of our demands have been met. And I know some people seem to have been fooled a little bit into thinking that the first one got met when Parliament said it was a climate emergency. And some people sort of seem to have thought the third one has been partially met by the fact that they've run a citizens' assembly in the UK. But everything about those acts have been utterly inappropriate and very, very weak, and they've resulted in practically no change. So it feels really important to me that we can help to inspire each other with the knowledge that we've had no demands met. We've been fantastically successful, and yet nothing has changed. And so, I hope that we can use that to spur ourselves on this year, because there's still a lot to do, isn't there? Did you want to come in, Jill?
Yes, I'm still sort of pondering the pessimism that comes with my wanting us to turn into the totality of the knowledge. And, I'm so aware also, since the climate and environmental issues have entered the media more, there are more and more scientific reports coming in nearly weekly that are consolidating and proving, the all that negative sphere. But, just to go back to, what you said before, you said, like death. Well, I know I'm going to die, right? And it may be, in 10, 15 years or whatever. But when I go out into the world, I'm not holding that in front of me all the time. Right? I don't say to my grandchildren, I'm going to die or whatever. I have that knowledge. I might talk about it and it come into conversation in some ways, but there's a span of time that is there within which there are certain things that can be engaged with and cultivated and fostered and moved on. So I feel that it's like that with, all the efforts that we do, is that, there is a span of time. The end of the tunnel is not tomorrow. It might be next week, right? Or it might be whatever. But there's a span of time within which there's many, many threads that we have got the responsibility to pick them up, to run with them, to leap with them, to shout with them, to disrupt with them, to do what it takes. And we're not necessarily going to get other people to do it by constantly talking about the extinction moment, right? There's enough bad information out there around pollution and oceans, whatever, which people are putting together the dots of that for them to say, yes, it makes sense to change our shift and to start doing that. And we've got to just keep doing that. It's not rosy tinted glasses and it's not hope, but it's necessity, and it's on the side of life. So I feel very polemical. I sort of get going, and I think it is in response to the pessimism that is there, and that in another moment could be stirred in me with intense grief.
And the love in action, which is what you were talking about earlier, Jill, which is, I've seen Tracy recently taking an action, and she was saying, this is what love looks like now. This is what it is. I'm enacting something which is called love here. And I thought that was just brilliant. Okay, so I'm conscious of the time, and probably everybody has to get on with their Friday evening soon. So, well, I guess what I wanted to try and close the session with would be to hear from all of you about this idea of acting as urgently as possible in order to extend any time that we have to act, to make that longer. And that way, given who's on the call, also, I guess what should we or could we be asking ourselves and our elders at this time? Because it strikes me that it's extremely valuable to have these perspectives from the war. I mean, my dad, I'm quite an unusual person for my age. I'm 38 years old, and my dad fought in the Second World War. And so I've always known about what it was like to be, you know, an 18-year-old who got shipped off and watched a lot of their friends go through these traumatic experiences and many deaths and much trauma in the community, and understanding that, you know, the relative hardship, but the actual real positive stories that I always used to hear from him about what it was like to be in the war, what it was like to live through those times. And I guess we also get this kind of we get painted often as environmentalists, or people who want to confront the issue of consumption with a sort of a concept that says we're kind of somehow regressive, we're against progress, we want to take people back to the Stone Age. I know people who've said, oh, you want everyone to live in a cave or something like this, and it's just not realistic, is it, to put it in that way. But also, even only sort of 20 years ago, we lived with a lot less consumption. And my background's in fashion. I know that in the last 15 years, the garment sector has doubled in size in 15 years. And I think 15 years ago, we had no shortage of clothing, for example. So in that way, you know, how can we, what can we ask of ourselves in terms of our connections with our elders and with our families, I guess, is my question, as we face this situation. And I guess I'll come to you first, Mayer, and then we'll go through and talk to the ladies.
Well, I'll just say a couple of things. The first is that perhaps, and something we haven't addressed really, and it might be a good opportunity to do so, which is to talk about what we do in the face of the fact that the most responsible thing we can do is not to have children. Does that mean to say that is one of the functions of Extinction Rebellion, or any body trying to promote a solution is going to say, don't have children? And it's a dilemma that we all have in the past faced, and I don't think it's been resolved. But then the second one, which is more immediate, which is what we know that COP26 is as good as a waste of time, because the only conclusion that the parties can reach is that we're on the path towards solving the world's problems of climate change. And we know they won't have achieved that, because in order to achieve it, they've got to stop using fossil fuels, and none of them are going to say so. They're not even prepared to say we're going to steadily and speedily reduce flying. And that's just one very small part of energy consumption. So do we just sort of, I mean, I feel a bit like Greta Thunberg, you know, do we just sort of bow our heads to the fact that we shouldn't accept it, because that can be interpreted as being apathetic if we just sort of give up? And I see what Jill has said about this. We've got to be seen to be addressing the situation in a positive light, and I think we are agreed that the positive light has got to be lengthening the tunnel rather than deceiving ourselves that we'll find light at the end of it, that we will have achieved something by the time we get to the end of the tunnel, because there isn't one.
Thank you, Mayer. Okay, well, let's go to you, Jill. I guess the other thing in my notes that I've not mentioned is to ask you to speak about the revolutionary requirements of this predicament. So perhaps that's relevant to start off with you, Jill. What do you think about we should be asking of our elders, and what do you think about the requirements of where we're sitting today?
It's such a big question. And to tell you the truth, I'm sort of filled with kind of fear and sadness after our discussion. So I just want to, rally again. I think we want to be asking of elders to be reassessing the world around us, the norms and the assumptions that have become sort of invisibly woven in to the way that we live our lives, to be part of the conversations of that reassessment of the way we live, on what are the systems that have resourced the ways of life, the inequalities, whether that's the directions of colonialism, slavery, the profit-making growth mentality, the normative consumption, all of these parts of the world that we have to find ways to be making, to be opening up and supporting the new conversations about them, some of which we are not fully familiar with. We've got to be open to contestations where we are learning, even as we try to move in to the urgency to be part of the transformatory action, to do what we can.
Thanks. Go ahead, La. What's your addition for the closing?
I asked our group what they thought the youth, XR youth, or all youth should ask of us. And the first thing was that we are absolutely committed to take non-violent direct action. 2, I'm going to live with this phrase, thank you, Mayer, to extend the tunnel. To do our best to bring in other elders, to acknowledge our part in the climate threats that we face today. We were the generation that plundered the planet. We are going to do our best to set a good example in living sustainably and be respectful to all, and to support youth in any and every way we can. So that's what I think our role is.
Thank you, La. I think we should send that out to all the elders that we can find. And finally, Bex.
It's because of the elders that I joined XR, because I watched them on the bridge at Waterloo, watching them being arrested, going, why are they doing it? And then I went home and I read, and then I Googled MBDA, and I went, okay, so that's how you might change things. Literally, I Googled it on Wikipedia. And so I think that I will be an elder soon. And then that beautiful responsibility will be on my shoulders, because actually what has shown me in this space is that Jill and Lara and Mayer have really amazing ways of seeing and thinking. And I'm at the start of my journey. And despite I joke a lot and I laugh my way through my days, I'm actually most of the time really, really angry. And it's been really beautiful hearing Jill talking so humanely and forgivingly. And I hope I reach that point when I'm an elder, because I think it's the most beautiful way of looking at older people in our movement. Really beautiful. But it's how I channel my anger, and what can you do? How far can you push yourself? And never underestimating yourself. Claire's known me a bit from the last couple of weeks. I'm quite timid and shy, and I'm prepared to push myself to my absolute limits. And I hope that in the next few months, many more people in Extinction Rebellion will know that it's to push yourself to your limits, whatever they are. It's what it takes. and all our limits are different. But if we do it together at the same time, we might make something happen. It might not save anything, but it might be the start of changing the democracy that we live in, that was going to, and we go back to it, it's killing children. And I want to walk around with signs around Parliament saying child killers work in there. It's perhaps a bit abrupt, but I feel abrupt and angry all like the time. I don't soft soap it in my head, and I'm really grateful for Mayer saying as it is, because all the time we live in that space where we don't want to talk about the bleakness. And I really appreciate Jill making it feel a little bit more holistic and hopeful and pretty. And I really love that, because I don't have that. I don't have someone near me that has that beautifulness in them. So if I can talk to people who have that beautiful wisdom, that would be really great. Maybe I could be an honorary elder, and then I can come and just steal your beauty and your wisdoms.
I'm sure you'd be so welcome, Bex, to join the elders. All right, well, thank you so much, everybody, and thanks for all your time, and thank you, Mayer, for joining us. Oh, La, final point.
Oh, no, absolutely.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Claire, for giving us this opportunity, to meet Mayer, what a joy, and to be with other amazing women. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Mayer.
Yes.
Thank you,
Yes.
Bex. Thank you, La.
Thank you all.
Everyone.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. Okay. So the things that I wanted to add in closing are to recognise that I didn't question what do you mean there's no future? And I think asking that simple question would have been a useful additional exploration. What is it that we're doing in Extinction Rebellion, which is attempting to engage with our humanity, which is looking at how we learn from the situation that we're in, how we think really hard about how to help and how to hopefully stop things from getting any worse, how to remain conscious of the long periods of time that we're talking about when we're looking at geological changes and changes like the ones that we've initiated to the biosphere. And the question for me around the message, is it act now before it's too late, or is it okay to say act now because it is too late? And I was very worried about ourselves on the call and about how this would affect people when it went out. I've spent quite a lot of time reflecting on that. And I know that it's been very much appreciated by me and by the others that we've reconnected outside of that call, the Women in XR. And in our friendship and connection, I think it feels clear to me that this is part of the work that we're doing, which represents a profound spiritual invitation to ask ourselves at this moment, when it seems so clear that our current politics, our current way of doing and being seems impossible for it to continue. And when we begin to really anticipate the magnitude of what could be changing here, new things appear. And I think it's a wonderful opportunity for us to consider that if everything definitely can't stay the same, then what are we doing about that, and what are we going to change, and how are we changing it, and how are we changing ourselves as we change the world around us as well. And so to advocate for non-violent work, to advocate for people to act in line with their sense of morality and to live their values, I think is something that hopefully it's never too late to engage in. And so I hope you're all okay, and there's some useful links in the text below, and perhaps we'll come back, as we said, the ladies will come back together and give you another update sometime in the near future. All right, thanks folks, bye.